Peter did a ride-along with Kyle Shanahan. He rode to work with him, hopped in the passenger seat of a Tesla, and drove to work with Kyle Shanahan, peppering him with all of the hard questions, holding his feet to the fire, Dibs.
Totally.
As they were making their way to Levi Stadium one day. First thing that comes out is the story behind the story of drafting Brock Purdy. And I'll tell you one thing that stood out right away in this story. Kyle Shanahan, before the draft, had a 4th-round grade on Brock Purdy. A 4th-round grade on Brock Purdy. I think that is significant, considering how much is made about where he was drafted. Mr. Irrelevant, he's a 7th-rounder. Well, if he was so good, then how come nobody wanted him before the 7th round? Kyle Shanahan assessed him as a 4th-round grade, but also, based on his knowledge of the league, believed that he would not go in the 4th round and thought it was possible they could get him later. As things started to move toward their pick in the 7th round, Kyle's looking at this, and what he calls an intense environment breaks out of all of the different scouts as that pick is coming up, going, "You got my guy's still there. No, but my guy's still there. But my linebacker, but my running back." And everybody starts going off for their guys. And it comes down to a conversation between Kyle Shanahan and John York. And Kyle says to him at one point, "Look, I get it. We just drafted Trey Lance, but we're not going to get him in free agency. Brock has since told Kyle, I was not going to sign with you if it had gotten to Brock not being drafted." And Kyle says to John, "Look, I get a lot of the debate here, but there's no doubt in my mind that that's the best football player left on the board."
And this is John York.
John York.
Jed's father.
Correct.
Yes, co-chairman.
So Kyle says that. Look, I understand a lot of the different points, but there's no doubt in my mind that that's the best quarterback. John York says to him, "Well, if that's what you believe, I don't even understand why this is a discussion. Why are we sitting here thinking about this?" And that was the end of that. Brock Purdy becomes a 49er, and as Kyle said on this ride along with Peter, we made the pick, and thank God we did.
It's crazy, too, because I'm reading the quote to Peter King, and he says, quote, "John and I, we took Purdy, and thank God we did." Mm-hmm. John and I. And
which John is he talking about?
Exactly. Is it John Lynch?
Yeah.
Or is it John York? Because John York, according to the story, empowered Kyle as if to say, you guys think he's the best player, then you take him. John York, and this is from Kyle, he said, John looked at him and said, "I don't get why there's discussion if you guys think he's the best player." And that's Dr. John going to Kyle, basically saying, forget these are the scouts. If you think he's the best player, Kyle, then go ahead and make the pick. And John and I, we took Purdy, and thank God we did. I think he's talking about John Lynch, but there you go. And the fact that that pick came out of another quarterback pick that they've already made, that to me, Mark, is the sneaky part of this whole story. Because the reason they had that pick was C.J. Beathard.
C.J. Beathard signs a small contract with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the 49ers get a comp pick out of it, the lowest valued pick in the entire draft, and that becomes Brock Purdy. It's a fascinating story that we all agree, especially if it gets the capper this weekend. If it gets the capper, I mean, it truly becomes one of the greatest stories in the history of the league. I don't think that's overselling it. I don't think that's overstating it. This is one of the best stories in the history of the league if Brock Purdy wins this football game. You can take Rudy and throw it in the trash. As far as your campy little sports movie, this story is way better. Way better than Rudy gets in garbage time of his last game and gets a sort of a faux sack at Notre Dame, which, by the way, is a story that Joe Montana has already tried to debunk a whole bunch of times. But anyway, be that as it may, this is really, really great stuff. in terms of how this came together and the questions that were asked of Kyle Shanahan. And I'm champing at the bit right now to ask a ton of questions to Peter about this specific ride along. He gets into his Super Bowl experiences in the past.
Right.
I love this. Which one bothers you more? 28-3 or 20-10?
It's a great question.
20-10.
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt.
And by the way, I'll take this one to my grave. Dude, he's not the head coach in the 28-3.
No, in 28-3, you're the offensive coordinator, and you were the 28. You weren't the 3. So it's not like he was sitting on the 3 as the DC thinking, yeah, we got them by the short hairs. You put up 28, and you're up 28-3 as the offensive coordinator. So, yes, and you weren't the head coach. So that one definitely would bother me less as opposed to up 20-10 with 7 minutes to go against Mahomes. That would definitely bother me more.
No doubt.
And the fact that you gave up not 1, not 2, but 3 touchdowns in the final 6:30.
I mean,
ouch.
I look back at that Patriots-Falcons game, and sure, there's 1,000 things that you could question, and then there's a bunch of other just weird, wonky stuff that happened. The Edelman catch.
Right.
I mean, right, sometimes that snowball gets going downhill. It's almost kind of like what the Niners did to the Lions last week. It's like 23 things need to happen, and they all need to go in the direction of one team, and they do, and you sort of shrug your shoulders and go, what are you going to do? But I bet Kyle Shanahan, especially A, he's the head coach, but B, he looks back at we've got 6.5 minutes to go, and we're up by 2 scores. And you look at the things that had to happen, and it's not just Kittle being called for a penalty and Bosa not, but there's the throws that Jimmy missed, and then there's the ones that he didn't even throw.
Exactly.
Like this is the most under-discussed thing about that. There were openings, things that Kyle schemed open that Jimmy didn't even see. And so I got to imagine that Super Bowl 4 years ago, and I think he basically said it directly to Peter, that eats at him like nothing else in the history of his career.
Of course. And now he's back here in a spot where he can not only avenge the loss to Kansas City from 4 years ago, but he can win the first Super Bowl, and he's doing it with Brock Purdy. And another thing we can ask Peter about is the evolution of the Tom Brady conversation, because they were circling back just this last offseason to Tom Brady again.
Yep. That was the one, and Peter used this as a little tease in sending out the article. What question caused Kyle Shanahan to look at Peter and go, I'm glad you asked that question? Well, the question was, did you tell Brock Purdy that you were trying to sign Tom Brady last offseason? Kyle goes, I'm glad you asked that question.